Ben. Johnlewis has probably done more than any other traditional retailer to firstly redefine and then exemplify what we mean by successful multi-channel retail. And you're now in the second year of being an elite performer in our top 500.
Yeah.
So just take us briefly behind the scenes and tell us a bit about your role and how that fits into the success story.
Maybe it's just worth talking a little bit about the history of Johnlewis in terms of where we've got to today, where we've come from. So I suppose 152 years and 140 of those have been largely without the internet. And so I would argue that the evolution of Johnlewis has accelerated hugely in the last decade, like so many others. So if I give you some context around that, so in 2008 we had 26 department stores. Next year we'll have 48 department stores. Our online business was 12% of our total business, and next year will be about 45% of our total business. And our distribution network, the physical footprint has grown 47% since 2008 to cater for the growth of online. We have a 400% increase in our SKUs. We have a 760% increase in our returns from online. We have grown and adapted and invested to do that, to get to the position where we find ourselves, you know, as an omni-channel retailer, an aspiration to maintain our position as Britain's leading omni-channel retailer.
So you've said the O word, omni-channel. We've said multi-channel, we've said e-commerce. Help me understand what that means. So if you've got 45% of your sales online, we talk about multi-channel, omni-channel. What does online and omni-channel mean for you?
I think, to some extent, I think there's a reasonable argument to say those almost tags that are beginning to come outdated. There is an argument that I always put forward. There's something called asymmetric retail, which will take over from the notion of channels, because if you have channel specific, by definition, you're trying to offer customers something bespoke to each channel. And I think the promised land is moving away from that notion of channels to saying this is a brand and you'll get the same experience wherever you go. And that really is the promised land that we aspire to do. So whatever experience you have with Johnlewis, you have the magic that comes with Johnlewis, whether it's online, it's on the telephone, it's in a branch, it's the same, it's one experience.
And you know, we're talking about the experience under the brand and the promise. Now, Johnlewis is relatively fortunate in that your stores are a similar size, so you don't go from a tiny little store to a massive one.
We've got one in St Pancras. I don't know if many people have been there, which is essentially a click and collect location to a large extent. It's done extremely well for headphones and things that people forget before they travel on the train. The Eurostar, there's Johnlewis in Heathrow Terminal 2, which is performing brilliantly. And obviously, so now we've got such different formats, and we're about to open a large department store next week in Leeds. So we have recognised the requirement for different formats across the UK and continue to cater for that. Integrating where we can the online experience and changing our stores to give more of a customer experience where we possibly can. And if you have the time and inclination, if you go to a Johnlewis branch and look at our Christmas offering later in November, I think this is reflective of perhaps not so relevant for online retailing, although it is definitely a spin-off. The experience we're going to offer for people in terms of Christmas with gifting hotspots and with tree tutorials, which is about how you decorate your home and your Christmas tree, and you can have people come to your home. We're recognising that the internet has fundamentally changed how our branches are seen, and it's an experience, and we're offering people not just a shopping experience but a wider experience as well. So there is a whole dynamic definitely related to how the branches are presented and the Johnlewis brand is presented.
But that dynamic isn't always a happy one. So I suppose as the balance in a store shifts to click and collect, I've ordered it, I'm impatient, I want to pick my stuff up, there are 400 middle class people in front of me in the queue, just get out of my way. I may look online and see hundreds of thousands of SKUs, but in store there's a limited range. So how are you managing that dynamic that says, on the one hand, I want to have a nice chat and learn and be supported through buying a sofa or an expensive fridge, but right now, let me in and out, I don't want to be here. So the dynamic's changed.
It is a dynamic, and this year is a tipping point for us where 51% of all our sales this year have been delivered so far. So we've crossed the line in terms of delivery and what that means for a brand. So I absolutely recognise your description. So that's why we're talking much more necessary about the branches being an experience. So you'd go and collect your click and collect, and there's more to that experience than just simply going in and saying, I'm waiting for my click and collect. And obviously the experience of collecting the click and collect needs to be swift and satisfactory for people, and you can't be messing around trying to fumble your way through a mountain of click and collect. So organising that operationally behind the scenes is incredibly important, and the pressure that comes with that has mounted. So in 2008 we had 12% of our volume was premium next day, and next year it's 70%. So
70.
So like so many retailers, I'm sure, the pressure of premium demand is huge. The volume of shift online is massive. So the challenge that we collectively faced operationally, and I believe the centrality of operational activity to any business now has grown exponentially in the last 5 or 6 years, and increasingly within Johnlewis, I think we're being looked at as saying this is really the heartbeat of the business now, and delivering on that, particularly with all that lies ahead in the next 3 or 4 months. Getting that right will define Johnlewis, and Johnlewis is all about Christmas, and the ad's coming soon, and it's wonderful.
I'm wondering which song, are you going to tell us the song and the cuddly animal, or which planet it's on this year?
Is that state secret? Nobody knows. Promise.
We'll ply you with drinks later and see if you can get a jump start on the mammal. Now, going back to the 51%, help me understand that. So you're saying that you've already delivered 51% of everything you're going to deliver, or that 51% of your deliveries are now coming through the online channel? Just make sure I understand that properly.
So our channel mix routinely each week is about 36% online and the rest in the branches. But when you go into a branch, you can order for delivery. So in fact, what we're doing is crossing over the channels effectively. So now that's got to a point where if you get the sum total of that activity together, we've now crossed the 50% mark. So.
Okay, and tell me a bit about this reduced time period, because we did an interview maybe 4 years ago with the e-com team, and one of the things that stuck in my mind was that when you launched Click and Collect, there was a surprisingly long period between making the purchase or reservation online and the customer actually bowling up in store. Yeah. I think it was like 2.5 days. So what's happened to make the customer go from, I'll pick it up later when the chauffeur drops me off, and now it's, I need it tomorrow?
Well, a busy click and collect collection day is 50% pickup, and routinely between 42 and 50% through the week. So not everybody comes in next day to collect it. In fact, in the Black Friday period, last year was about 38% of people actually pitched up next day to collect it, and typically after Christmas as well. So you get, depends on the time of year, depends on the pickup rate, but that obviously has a consequence for managing it in a branch, or in a Waitrose branch in particular. So all that needs to be factored in. Not everybody wants it next day, and evidently if we offer premium click and collect for next day, and it's getting increasingly challenging to continue to do so, then we've got to look at proposition to say, actually, if people don't want it next day, why do we do it next day? So,
well, we'll come back to Black Friday before we let you leave, but we sort of skipped over your role at Johnlewis and the changing role of operational capability within the partnership. So maybe let's just track back and say, Ben Farrell, what do you do?
On a daily basis, I'm responsible for aspects of the distribution operation, the transport operation across Johnlewis, and the distribution centre operations that include the relationship with the suppliers, the inbound stock flow, where the stock goes, the capacity planning and management of the network, the national returns operation, and also within Johnlewis, I'm responsible for something called OPAL, which is operational alignment, which takes a view across the organisation that tries to ensure that we have a sufficient operational capability to deliver an end-to-end supply chain without any hiccups. So we have cross-functional working, which includes all the aspects of a normal business you'd recognise, making sure, for example, if we were planning Black Friday, we'd say, what does a 20% uplift on Black Friday mean on the website, in IT, in the checkout, in the distribution, in the carrier network, in the Waitrose branches, right the way across the supply chain. We've got to plan together how we'd manage that and how we'd deliver that. So it's about joining up the dots across a business in a different way than perhaps has been done in the past, which is arguably tend to be down each of the areas of business responsibility.
So that sounds very lovely and collegiate, and I'm sure there are never any arguments in those meetings. But in a traditional retailer, the focus of transaction and sales was always around the product. So you'd normally have had maybe the merchandising team looking at where the product needs to be and so on. So how has that shift moved to Opal? What was the conversation that said, we need to create this, or did it just emerge?
It emerged to some extent, but also it was galvanised by a recognition that Johnlewis is as good as the weakest link, and when people didn't understand what the expectation was necessarily, they didn't understand if they were going to be caught out. So it was just as much as an articulation. When we first started, and we started describing even the forecasts, and everybody spoke a different language, and eventually we got to a point where we could all recognise what we were saying in terms of scale and size of a challenge or whatever it was, and how we approach things. So it's just about breaking down some traditional stovepipes and working across the business. And increasingly people recognise that as an effective way of working.
Mm. And what were the big challenges, if any, of putting that in place? You've mentioned the sort of vocabulary angle, but there's also a timescale issue. So you've got the trading teams who are looking on a weekly, fortnightly basis, e-commerce looking within the hour, merchandisers already planning next Christmas. Yeah. So how do you get people out of their offices into one place, or physically, or to concentrate on that when they have other priorities?
I'm not saying that they necessarily don't have other priorities, and it's an iterative process, and we're getting better and better at it, and each year we plan and understand more about each other's area of the business, and I'm not saying there aren't any self-interests within it, but over time we seem to be getting collectively more competent at understanding the implications across the business, to the extent of saying, well, an uplift on the website at this time of day means something in the contact centres at this time of day, means something in the distribution centres. So we're looking and trying to forecast through the business if we've got the operational capacity to manage that, and where we don't, to intervene in the supply chain and say, do you know what, that's not doable, we need to adjust the cut-off time or whatever in order that we actually produce on the promise that we've given to the customer.
But this is quite
so we're protecting the customer experience. I suppose that it's all unified by the idea that we actually put the customer, front and centre of all we're thinking about, and saying how do we provide that experience, and making sure that everyone's got that common goal in mind, which they do. And I suppose to some extent it's easy when everybody has that notion that actually this is what we're trying to achieve, so they're unified with a common purpose.
So many people though talk about having the customer at the centre of their business, but it's just a nostrum. And another unfair characterisation is that the preventers of progress live in IT and operations. Computer says no, bottleneck, can't do it. So what you're really talking about is a very positive revolution, I think, in the role of operations professionals, but also a more commercial, genuinely enabling situation.
Yeah, so increasingly we've become, in operations, involved with the commercial team to say, we recognise your ambition to put this online. The cost, pick, pack, wrap and dispatch is this. We think commercially there's a conversation to have about the validity of putting that product there at this particular time of year, for example. So we're beginning to become increasingly involved in those discussions, and I think people are increasingly recognising that they can't proceed commercially without consideration of all the full panoply of operational considerations. So that's what about the shift of operations in the business and into the central heartland of the business.
Which again is one of the reasons we set up e-delivery. But about 5 years ago, our conference theme was about how you could no longer be just in e-commerce. You had to embrace the whole business and become a jack of all trades, master of all as well.
Yeah.
So what is this doing to your staff? So people who maybe come from a traditional operations heritage, people who've been at Johnlewis for decades, maybe their whole career, and you're now talking about this customer first, internal customer, commercial considerations. What's this doing to your staff development and your recruitment?
Well, we've obviously had to recruit more people to deliver the operation successfully, and we've started to think differently, I suppose, about the future professionals within the supply chain. And I was at the Scala logistic debate earlier this year, and really the central tenet, I think everybody in the room recognised, was a change in the tone of supply chain professionals nationally, and also our ability to attract young talent in to supply chains in retail and more widely, to say this is an area where people are welcomed in terms of innovation and new skill sets, and our ability to articulate the notion of moving away simply from trucks and sheds to something that is defining business success. And I think that our challenge collectively is recruiting the right people to deliver successfully in the future on the operational challenges businesses are faced, and putting things in place, graduate programs and that sort of thing. Not saying that the graduate program is necessarily the simple answer, but making a career attractive enough to get the very best talent for the future.
So there's a lot of work with science, technology, engineering, maths, this whole STEAM program. But retail typically has not been seen as a premium career path. And within retail, I don't want to be dismissive, but after marketing and maybe product, the warehouses would cover distant 17th.
Yeah.
So what's your conversation you're having with young people, either at graduate or even school leaver age, or people who are maybe thinking about coming out to career? Just tell me what the attraction is to them to move into retail.
I just think that I recognise entirely the description you provide, and when I look at Johnlewis and what we're doing, and we're sort of beginning, I'm not saying that everyone else isn't contributing or necessarily it's a jigsaw where everybody plays a part, that the role is increasingly central to Johnlewis. The role is increasingly setting the pace, whether it's proposition in terms of speed of delivery, whether it's defining the customer experience, and we spend a lot of time worrying about how we can bring the Johnlewis customer experience through the supply chain into people's homes and providing that sort of thing, whether it's a training we're giving, some of our installation teams that provide home installations, we're providing a skill set that nobody else is necessarily providing, and innovation that is an attractive career, and we also are fundamentally based from when Johnlewis was set up by John Speed and Lewis as an experiment. So everybody is really encouraged to experiment, and there's a sort of culture around experimentation, and particularly where the areas of the business are growing, for example, in operations. So I think we can demonstrate and show, and any observer would see that increasingly operations is an area of the business is growing, it's fast moving, it's vibrant, and it's setting the pace within the business.
Now,
and it's also about not dusty sheds, the operations in Milton Keynes. If you go inside our warehouses and you saw the automation, I mean, there is an automated hanging garment solution we've just started to use now. There's 1.7 million hanging garments, and the associated picking and packing and dispatch all automated with a staff of about 24 people over a 24-hour period. So we've really invested in technology, we've really invested in innovation, and we've taken it away, I think, from about the warehouse fulfillment to a technical fulfillment and innovating in that technical space. And we've done quite a bit of work with Cranfield University on emerging technologies as well. I just think the tenor and tone of the supply chain is changing.
So that's very exciting, and we might get back to the warehouse later, but you did say one of my favourite words, innovation. Now, one of the things that characterises for me...
We went to Cranfield University to the aerospace department to talk to them about drones, because we kept seeing Amazon drones, and I wanted to find out if we were going to be left behind, and we could have an interesting discussion today, because the rhetoric of technology and the reality, there's quite a big space in between that. So we've done a lot with Cranfield University around innovation and technological innovation to see what the solution is, and we were particularly worried about getting, how do we get next day to the north of Scotland in time, and whether we could have some sort of innovation there. And they offered us a hovercraft that they said they could get up the side of. We could get to Aberdeen in 3 hours if we used it, but it would cost about £100 per parcel at least. So it was.
Yeah, I think it was last year we tried to do the first drone delivery of an Apple Watch at our expo, and I was really excited, but I wasn't allowed to touch it. We had a 50-metre exclusion area. We had to ring Birmingham Airport to have permission. I thought, I can't imagine the postie doing this for 12 minutes, but we'll see.
There's some good innovation, I think, in vehicle technology, battery technology in particular, that could change in terms of autonomous vehicles, which could change the supply chain in the sort of nearer future.
Okay, so hopefully Katie might touch on some drones later, because we all like a drone. But you talked about IT infrastructure, expensive things that need a whole organisation behind them.
Yes.
Yet innovation has to be quite personal. And so at Johnlewis, one of the things I've loved, I've never met someone from Johnlewis who isn't charming, intelligent, helpful, friendly and collegiate. But it's very comfortable. So innovation means disagreeing. It means making mistakes, screwing up, breaking things, which doesn't strike me as the kind of thing you want to report on a Monday morning. So how do you
Probably
develop...
you have to get third parties to get involved. So we've got JLab, which is about technology innovation, and we have a sort of third party arena where people could come and present to us their innovations, and then we will actually fund.
But how does that change your people? So observing other people make mistakes or getting rid of them if you don't like the way they're going is easy. Whereas, you've got people who stay in Johnlewis a long time. They have green blood. They've succeeded by doing it this way. And you say, go and break something, go and innovate. How does that conversation, how does that culture change, if it is indeed a culture change, happen?
I think it's still a challenge. We're realistic about that, because we have this incredible strength of people staying for a long time, and self-evidently since 2008 the world's fundamentally changed as I described. So there's definitely a challenge there, but we've also brought a lot of people in from different professions and different backgrounds within retail as well, to sort of change and introduce new thought. And I think whilst we recognise it, as you described, that's beginning to change, and we've invested a lot of time and effort and taking people away from the business and saying, your job is to innovate, go away and think about what we might. The Waitrose finance director has just recently taken on the job as group business development director, which is basically an innovative role to think about the future of the Johnlewis partnership and where we are. So formal innovation, I think, by assigning people the job of innovating has helped.
Great. Now, we've talked about the future, but on our doorstep, we have Black 5 Day.
Black 5 Day,
which I wish I'd thought of that, but I think it was Salmon got there before me. I'm contractually obliged to say when I steal other people's phrases. Last year, what was interesting was how little broke. We were doing hourly monitoring of websites, and it was just so boring because everyone just coped. So are you going to bore us to death by coping again?
We hope so. We've worked really hard to try and cope and prepare ourselves and continue to prepare ourselves.
So how are you preparing yourselves? Is it 10 Weetabix a morning and press-ups?
The £5 billion weekend is forecast in the UK, and whether the UK infrastructure end-to-end can sustain that position, I'm not sure. But within Johnlewis, we recognised in 2014 that we needed to prepare, so we did some stuff to prepare ourselves, and we got through when many others didn't, but recognised that this was all sort of new and skin-of-your-teeth operations, and with the growth of premium demand, the peaks within our 3 peaks of Black Friday, Christmas week and the clearance period have become peakier, so the demand is massive, and we're forecasting a big uplift on. There's lots of reasons why you can make a very credible story about the size of Black Friday online in UK this year, and Saturday and Sunday and Monday potentially. So the Black 5-day period. So we have changed an awful lot in our business this year, not related necessarily to that weekend, but we've opened new warehouses, 2 huge new warehouses with all the complexity. That we've got a returns operation that we're going to go live with in a couple of weeks' time. We've got pre-retail activity that we're undertaking. We've got lots and lots of stuff to get right before we go into the peak period. We've got all the systems infrastructure that needs to change below that. We've got a website that's been re-platformed. We've got an ordering management system, an order management system that's changed. We have got so much change this year and invested so much money that it makes us anxious. So we have tested and stress tested and continue to do that. We're doing a stress test tomorrow on our warehouse management systems, replicating volume, replicating order drops at a sort of Black Friday level that would say, you know, how we've had to hold a load of orders back, drop them in for 2 hours at the sort of scale we saw, and with a bit on for this year to make sure that actually there is the capacity in data terms to get that through. We've got all the pack benches lined up. We have rehearsed and tested ourselves inevitably, and we've identified the risks, and there's some things we can't control. I mean, you know, that cybercrime in the UK retail has been significant, I think, over the last few years and growing. It's not necessarily within our control, but at least we've put all the measures in place. We're rehearsing and trying to get ourselves as prepared as possible to be able to get through the Black 5 day, but for us that coincides with the adverts and the marketing campaign for Christmas, so we need to get up to that level and sustain it, and getting through in good shape will define the rest of the Christmas period. So it's really important to us. So we've rehearsed and we've taken extra measures to...
You made that without Valium or Alka-Seltzer, so that was impressive. But feeling confident about it, sorry, I don't want to make you hostage of fortune.
No, I
it's
mean,
a terrible thing to ask.
We are really... Johnlewis is a very, very introspective and self-critical organisation. Never, ever feels confident. It never ever says to itself, oh, that's fine, it'll be all right. So we're always paranoid about stuff, and we will go on being paranoid right to the day and doing more and more. It's just a very interesting cultural thing that exists in Johnlewis. I suppose that's why it's sort of existed for so long and continues to grow and develop and change, because it is ultimately paranoid.
So let's just finish off by looking after the 3 peaks. What are you looking forward to next year? What's exciting you?
Oh, we've got no new warehouses opening. We've got nothing changing. That's not quite true. I think the business is fundamentally in a metamorphosis to something new. It's a very, very exciting time. We're working now increasingly across Johnlewis and Waitrose, and I think more of the customers will see that. There's a massive opportunity, I think, to change the perspective of customers on the high street about the branches, about our interaction with Waitrose, offer much more of a joined-up position between 2 great brands in the UK, and for operations, and I think we'll just continue to be seen to grow and develop and define the success of the business, and more of the business saying, can you do this? We need to do this. How can you support us?
Wonderful. Look, Ben, I think you have exemplified for us that connected, commercial, operations professional. I think it's a real litmus test of that ability to come and represent the business so well. And I think your openness and sharing has been inspiring and a fantastic start to the conference. So if you could join me in thanking Ben for his time, it would be fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
That was really good. Thank you.